To the rule, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Manning, and a gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kim, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 1934 as amended.
Without objection,
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 1934, the Promoting United States International Leadership in 5G Act. Let me start by thanking Ranking Member McCall, who has been an important advocate in advancing U.S. leadership in global telecoms and 5G technology. Countering China's and Russia's malign influence in this industry is critical for protecting our national security, and I thank him for his bipartisan work in furtherance of these ends. A big part of advancing U.S. 5G leadership is ensuring that America and allied countries are in the room, at the table, and leading the charge to set next-generation technology standards. And no organization is more critical to that process than a little-known UN organization called the International Telecommunication Union, or ITU. For years, China and Russia have quietly targeted the ITU as a central battleground to advance their strategic technology interests. They have sought to use the ITU to unfairly advantage their telecom companies, giving Putin and the PRC power over critical communications infrastructure worldwide. For the past 8 years, a Chinese national has served as Secretary General of the ITU. China has used this perch to favor its own companies and make the rules of the digital road more favorable to authoritarians. The Secretary General has defended Huawei against critics and promoted the PRC's China Belt and Road campaign. With the ITU as its forum, Beijing has worked to unfairly promote Chinese companies' technical standards. Now, a pivotal election for the next ITU Secretary General is set to take place in September between a fantastic American candidate, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, and former Huawei executive and Russian Deputy Telecoms Minister, Rashid Ismailov, whom China and Russia back. Should the United States and its allies across the world fail to win this election, the ITU's technical integrity would be endangered and authoritarian governments around the globe would be empowered. A Russian Secretary General would extend Putin's ability to exert influence in the rules-based international system for which he has shown the utmost contempt. This bill is important because the U.S. must increase its engagement at the ITU and work with our allies and partners to counter China's and Russia's malign influence. H.R. 1934 would do just that by forming an interagency working group to align our strategy at the ITU with allies and monitor China's influence in the organization. It would also strengthen much-needed coordination with Congress so we can be supportive partners in this strategic competition. We cannot be complacent about the coming election. The battle for influence playing out at the ITU is one we cannot afford to lose, and H.R. 1934 is an essential tool for advancing U.S. leadership in this powerful organization. I urge my colleagues to support this effort by voting for this legislation today. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I rise in support of this important bipartisan legislation, the Promoting U.S. International Leadership in 5G Act. Mr. Speaker, the Chinese Communist Party does not hide the fact that they do whatever it takes to become the prominent global power, especially by taking control of the world's 5G networks. The CCP's espionage tactics, theft of U.S. intellectual property, and cyber hacking threaten our national security and our competitiveness in the international community. Allowing the CCP to establish the global standards for 5G and push countries to adopt 5G technology from CCP-linked companies like Huawei will only increase the amount of control and influence that the CCP has globally. This bill provides increased cooperation between the United States and our allies to identify and counter security risks posed by Chinese Communist Party-linked companies in 5G. In addition, the bill requires the State Department to develop a diplomatic strategy to increase engagement with partners at the international standards-setting bodies, such as the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, which sets global standards for technologies such as 5G. There is an important upcoming election at the ITU, which will decide the future of global communications, telecommunications for years to come. It is imperative that we pass this bill today so that the United States and our allies can put up a united front against the Russian and CCP-aligned candidate for Secretary General of the ITU. Russia's campaign to elect a Russian national who is a former Huawei executive to serve as the Secretary General of the ITU is indicative of Russia and China's efforts to use the international organizations to promote their interest and malign influence. The United States should ensure that we are coordinated in driving support for the United States candidate, Dorian Bogdan-Martin, for the Secretary General of the ITU, but the State Department should also be engaging on the important down-ballot races at the ITU. There are 4 other posts of significance within the ITU's leadership structure, including the Director of the ITU Development Sector, ITUD. The ITUD plays a particularly vital role in supporting multilateral cooperation for fair and open interest governance through trustworthy deployment of digital technologies in the developing world. The United States must be doing everything we can to ensure Russian and Chinese malign influence does not grow. This bill will help, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to thank Ranking Member Mike McCall and Representative Koalar for their work on this legislation. This bill will help ensure that the United States is doing all we can to stop Russian and Chinese malign influence taking control of the world's 5G networks. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1934 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. For what purpose does a gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
As for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question are postponed. Kind of popped up there like Batman. For what purpose does a gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to H. Con. Res. 59, condemning the October 25, 2021 military coup in Sudan and standing with the people of Sudan.
The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 59, concurrent resolution condemning the October 25, 2021 military coup in Sudan and standing with the people of Sudan.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Manning, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kim, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H-Con Res 59, condemning the October 25th, 21 military coup in Sudan and standing with the people of Sudan. I also ask to include in the congressional record—
Without objection.
I also ask to include in the congressional record an exchange of letters between Chairman Meeks and the chair of the House Financial Services Committee on H-Con Res 59.
The gentlewoman is recognized. Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H-Con Res 59. I would first like to thank my colleague, Chairman Meeks, for drafting this important resolution. On October 25, 2021, Sudan's military leaders launched a coup that essentially dissolved nearly 2 years of progress toward establishing a civilian-led transitional government that would be accountable to the people of Sudan. Since then, the military junta has undertaken a campaign involving serious human rights violations, including the unlawful detention of the recognized prime minister, senior government officials, and members of civil society. Civilian protesters have been maimed, detained, and killed arbitrarily. Now, the military junta has brazenly aligned itself with the Kremlin and provided Putin access to its mining sector at a time when Russia is seeking funds to wage its own brutal, illegal war in Ukraine. For these reasons, Congress needs to send a unified message to Sudan's military junta by strongly condemning the October 25th coup and reaffirming our support for the Sudanese people. This resolution will also signal to the world that the international community must take a stand against the anti-democratic trends sweeping Sudan and the region. We must continue championing multilateral efforts to bring peace and stability to Sudan. While clearly imperfect, I believe the UN-mediated process to advance Sudan's political transition and reestablish the path to peace could be viable with the right leadership and inclusive representation. In passing this resolution and a companion resolution recently passed by our colleagues in the Senate, I ask you to support this call to stand with the people of Sudan and urge Sudan's military junta to restore the civilian-led transition as the best hope for peace and prosperity in Sudan. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of House Concurrent Resolution 59, condemning the October 25th coup in Sudan. I also want to thank Chairman Mix, Ranking Member McCall, as well as Chairwoman Bass and Ranking Member Smith of the Africa Subcommittee. The people of Sudan have worked tirelessly for freedom and democracy since the ousting of 30-year dictator Omar al-Bashir. Unfortunately, the path towards civilian-led democracy was halted when military junta leaders detained civilian leaders and took over government last fall. These actions undermined months of progress made under transitional authorities and hope for a new future in Sudan. Military leaders like General Burhan and General Hemeti have once again prioritized power as well as personal and financial gain over the will of the people. While I'm glad Congress is sending an important and united message condemning the October 25th coup, more must be done. That is why I am leading the Sudan Democracy Act, which passed out of the committee earlier this year. The same military junta that overthrew the civilian-led transitional government and are undermining peace and stability in Sudan are also some of the same individuals implicated in gross violations of human rights, corruption, and illicit financial scams. I urge the administration to utilize all existing sanctions authority to demand accountability for these actions, while we continue to work here in Congress to find a path forward for new important sanctions authority. I stand firmly behind the people of Sudan or anywhere else in the world where people are fighting for freedom and democracy. I urge all my colleagues to support this important measure. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you. I'm ready to close. And in closing,
Gentlewoman is recognized.
thanks. In closing, I again want to thank my colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Africa Subcommittee for offering this important resolution. Last month, the Senate unanimously passed an identical resolution, and Congress is speaking clearly with one voice in support of the people of Sudan and their tireless fight for democracy. The United States should continue to support human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society leaders in Sudan who are standing up for democracy. But it is also critical that the Biden administration rethink any foreign assistance intended for Sudan under this new military junta leadership. Prior appropriations bills provided over $700 million to solidify a fledgling civilian-led transitional government. Unfortunately, that government is no longer in power, and precious taxpayer resources should not be beholden to this unfortunate new reality in Sudan. I again commend the people of Sudan for their steadfast support of democracy, and I'm proud that today the United States Congress sends a strong message of solidarity. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the October 25th military coup in Sudan represents a dark day for the people of Sudan. It puts Sudan and its people on an aggressive path that has eroded their human rights and their aspirations for a civilian-led transition. This transition, with historic support from the United States, augured peace, stability, and democratic governance in Sudan for the first time in decades. Instead, the military junta decided to seize power without regard for the will of Sudan's people. This resolution will echo the voice of the international community by condemning the coup, standing up for Sudan's people, and calling for full accountability for the junta's leaders who have abused their power and their people. The passage of this concurrent resolution is a step in the right direction. I again thank Chairman Meeks for his leadership on this resolution, and I urge all my colleagues to join us by voting in the affirmative. I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 59? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. Purpose, does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I'd like to call for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. For what purpose does a gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 720, calling for stability and the cessation of violence and condemning ISIS-affiliated terrorist activity in northern Mozambique, including the Cabo Delgado province, and for other purposes.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 720, resolution calling for stability and the cessation of violence and condemning ISIS-affiliated terrorist activity in northern Mozambique, including the Cabo Delgado province, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Manning, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kim, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on House Resolution 720, calling for stability and the cessation of violence and condemning ISIS-affiliated terrorist activity in northern Mozambique, including the Cabo Delgado province, and for other purposes.
Objection?
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of House Resolution 720, calling for stability and the cessation of violence and condemning ISIS-affiliated terrorist activity in northern Mozambique, including the Cabo Delgado province, and for other purposes. Let me start by thanking Representative Sarah Jacobs for her work on this critical resolution. Since 2017, terrorists operating under the ISIS banner have laid waste to a large part of Cabo Delgado province in northern Mozambique, killing thousands of civilians, displacing millions, and grinding almost all economic activity in the region to a halt. The devastation these terrorists inflicted on the people spurred an unprecedented humanitarian crisis in northern Mozambique that continues to unfold. With the support of the United States, Rwanda, the European Union, South Africa, and other Southern African Development Community members, the terrorist threat in northern Mozambique has been largely neutralized. There is more work to do, including those efforts underway to stabilize the region, return refugees and IDPs to their homes, and revitalize livelihood and the regional economy. To effectively address these issues, including the underlying drivers of violent extremism, the government of the Republic of Mozambique must spearhead a strong, comprehensive plan to implement a national security strategy and establish an inclusive process for economic growth and development in the North. The United States remains committed to supporting Mozambique's efforts to strengthen democracy, improve transparency and other good governance measures, and stimulate its economy. This resolution condemns the violence against civilians in the Cabo Delgado province, including the terrorist attacks carried out by ISIS Mozambique, and calls on the government of the Republic of Mozambique to end the conflict and increase its humanitarian support effort. The United States stands with the people of Mozambique and will continue to counter the spread of violent extremism there and around the world. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of House Resolution 720 that I'm co-leading alongside my colleague, Representative Sarah Jacobs. I want to thank Chairman Mix and Ranking Member McCall for their support as well. This resolution calls for a cessation of violence and condemns ISIS-affiliated terrorists in northern Mozambique. Since 2017, ISIS-affiliated extremists launched an armed insurgency in northern Mozambique and have brutalized communities, displaced civilians, and attacked schools, homes, and hospitals. Last year, terrorist elements took over the town of Parma, further causing chaos, displacement, and gruesome civilian casualties. The largest private U.S. investment on the continent, a natural gas project, was forced to halt work and temporarily withdraw. I strongly condemn these violent attacks, and I commend the government of Mozambique's efforts to dedicate resources to addressing this threat and early steps to partner with the United States and allies to build the capacity and professionalization of security forces, bolster the justice system, and ensure governance and services to communities in previously marginalized areas of Cabo Delgado province. I also commend the troop deployment by the Southern African Development Community to stabilize the region. We have seen this elsewhere, where the early days of ISIS in Syria or Boko Haram in northeast Nigeria. Terrorist insurgency movements cannot be left unaddressed, and early steps to address the root causes of such movements can prevent costly interventions and massive loss of human life later on. The United States has key economic, security, and diplomatic interests in urgently addressing this terrorist threat. So I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield 4 minutes to the representative from California, the Vice Chair of the International Development, International Organizations, and Global Corporate Social Impact Subcommittee, the Honorable Sarah Jacobs.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend Representative Manning for yielding time, to Chairman Meeks for advancing this legislation in committee, and Chairwoman Bass and my friend Congresswoman Kim for partnering with me on this important effort. I rise today in support of my resolution on Mozambique, which calls for stability and the cessation of violence in northern Mozambique and condemns the attacks and violence by ISIS Mozambique. It calls for a new strategy and a new approach for how the U.S. engages with Mozambique to address conflict and violent extremism. And part of why passing this resolution today is so important is because we need to raise awareness in this body and in this country about the dire humanitarian situation in Mozambique. Since 2017, ISIS Mozambique, also known as Alu al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, has inflicted violence on communities in northern Mozambique. These insurgents have brutalized people and targeted civilians through mass beheadings of men and boys, abductions of children, and attacks against key civilian infrastructure. This violence, combined with the government response to it, has killed over 1,700 civilians in Cabo Delgado province alone. The international community, particularly the South African Development Community forces and Rwanda's forces, have responded with troop deployments to secure areas and shield civilians from continued violence. But let's be clear. We know that a military-led response will not be enough. That's why I was so supportive of the Biden administration's recent designation of Mozambique as a priority country under the Global Fragility Act, so that we can better align resources among the interagency and work to address the key drivers of this violence and other forms of instability in the country. And as we craft our strategy for Mozambique, we must be clear-eyed about the underlying grievance and what it will really take to make a difference in preventing new violence from occurring. We know that terrorism and violent extremism are often fueled by perceptions of state repression, human rights abuses, and socioeconomic and political marginalization. We know that these factors exist in Mozambique and in the state response to ISIS Mozambique. We need to be honest about the challenges impacting the Mozambican people in order to get serious about preventing future terrorist recruitment. We also need to ensure we're helping the Mozambican government support development goals of Cabo Delgado and northern Mozambique that will allow all sectors of society to thrive. That's why I'm looking forward to the United States partnership with the Mozambique government and the Mozambican people, and to ensuring our strategy is shaped by lessons learned from our counterterrorism missions across the world that have consistently fallen short. This resolution has strong support from across the ideological spectrum. I'm proud to lead the passage of this important resolution, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I'm prepared to close.
The gentlewoman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, in closing, this resolution condemns the terrorist attacks and ISIS insurgency in northern Mozambique and urges the administration to prioritize efforts to address this threat. And I'm pleased that the administration selected Mozambique as a priority country to implement a 10-year strategy for U.S. diplomatic development and security engagement. This type of long-term interagency planning is critically important to coordinating U.S. efforts and ensuring the most effective use of resources to target the root causes of the instability and terrorism. This issue cannot wait, and the administration must implement the requirements of the Global Fragility Act without further delay. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the terrorist activity that has destabilized parts of northern Mozambique is a symptom of a larger issue at hand. The United States is working closely with the Mozambican government to help address the drivers of terrorist recruitment by supporting governance reforms, providing humanitarian assistance, and promoting other stabilization efforts in the country. This resolution underscores that commitment and urges the Mozambican government to create a centralized and comprehensive strategy to counter violent extremism and restore security in its northern region. I again thank Representative Jacobs for her leadership on this resolution, and I urge all my colleagues to join us by voting in the affirmative. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 720? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to H-Con Res 45, expressing the sense of Congress regarding the execution-style murders of United States citizens Ili Agron and Mehmet Bytyqi in the Republic of Serbia in July 1999.
The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 45, concurrent resolution expressing the sense of Congress regarding the execution-style murders of United States citizens Ili Agron and Mehmet Bytyqi in the Republic of Serbia in July of 1999.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Manning, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kim, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H-Con Res 45.
Without objection,
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
the gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H-Con Res 45, a resolution condemning the execution-style murderers of the U.S. citizen Bytyqi brothers in the Republic of Serbia in July 1999. Let me start by thanking Representative Lee Zeldin for his bipartisan work in bringing their murderers to justice. These 3 brave brothers, whose family hails from what is now Kosovo, were simply trying to help a Romanian family find safety outside Kosovo when they were trapped at an unmarked administrative border. After 15 days of jail, the brothers were taken by Special Operations Unit of the Serbian Ministry of Internal Affairs, where they lost their lives at the hands of Serbian officials. The brothers were in their early 20s. Their bodies were not found until 2 years later, buried atop a mass grave of Kosovo civilians. In the 23 years since, the United States has been promised that justice will be delivered, and yet not one person has been found guilty of their murder. This measure would call on the Serbian government to prioritize the investigation and prosecution of their murderers, and on the United States to devote the resources necessary to assist in bringing them to justice. The 116th Congress passed this resolution, and it is my hope that this Congress does the same. These 3 young men deserve justice and accountability. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of House Concurrent Resolution 45, and I want to thank Representative Zeldin for championing this important resolution. As the world focuses on the horrors of the war crimes being committed by Vladimir Putin's invading forces in Ukraine, we must not forget the victims of the past war crimes still awaiting justice. Ili Agron and Mehmet Bytyqi were 3 American brothers from New York State who are suspected to have been killed in July 1999 by Serbian authorities. After disappearing while in the custody of Serbian special police, they were executed, shot in the head with their hands tied behind their backs. Their bodies were later discovered in a mass grave at a training compound of the Serbian secret police. Tragically, nearly 23 years later, there has still not been a full investigation into their bodies, into their deaths, and the Bytyqi brothers' murderers have yet to be brought to justice. This is unacceptable. This case, among others, illustrates the continued need for Serbia to resolve outstanding war crimes investigations. Holding accountable those who committed and covered up the murder of Bytyqi brothers is critical to continuing to strengthen bilateral relations between the United States and Belgrade. Therefore, I urge all my colleagues to join me in supporting this resolution. Congress must be on the record calling on Serbian authorities to once and for all deliver justice for the Bytyqi brothers and their family. I reserve the balance of my time.
California reserves. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further requests for time, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina reserves. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, 23 years is too long for Bytyqi brothers and their family to go without justice. Seriously dealing with the past and bringing justice to all victims of war crimes committed in the wars that followed the breakup of the former Yugoslavia is needed to ensure reconciliation and peace throughout the region. Mr. Zeldin reintroduced this bipartisan resolution last year, and I urge Belgrade to commit to a proper investigation and full accountability for these 3 Americans so this resolution does not have to be reintroduced once again next Congress. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California yields. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H. Conres 45 will ensure that the United States is doing everything in our power to bring the murderers of United States citizens Ili, Agron, and Mehmet Bytyqi to justice. I again thank Representative Lee Zeldin for his leadership on this resolution, and I urge my colleagues to join us by voting in the affirmative. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina yields. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 45? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to the Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 892, calling on the government of the Republic of Rwanda to release Paul Rusesabagina on humanitarian grounds as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 892, Resolution